fellow hobbyists. Whether you're an orc enthusiast like me or you don't know how to make things happen purely by believing hard enough, I'm glad you're here. I got the inspiration for this video that I'm calling Happy Little Orksidents, or The Joy of Painting Wee Figures, after my son's girlfriend's brother.
I am your father's brother's nephew's cousin's former roommate.
What's that make us?
Absolutely nothing.
Received a Warhammer model as a gift and had no idea where to get started, prompting her to ask me what he should do. Now, there are a lot of videos out there about how to get started, but most of them involve long lists of products to buy in the form of miniature paints and tools, and they usually have affiliate links and so on. I'd love to do that, but I'm not important enough yet for affiliate links. And plus, I think someone should decide if they enjoy the hobby before spending a lot of money on it. I ended up offering to loan tools and paints to this young fellow, but my philosophy in this video was, how could someone try out painting one of these Wii figures for the first time if they didn't have a friend to borrow paints and supplies from, while spending as little as possible and still having a good experience? This ended up getting a little too long for one video, so I'm going to break it up into 3 parts. The first part will cover how to prep the miniature. The second will talk about getting it to a well-painted base standard. And the third will cover getting it up to a nicer standard while teaching a few interesting techniques that I don't think are beyond the reach of beginners and don't require any special tools. Let's begin.
Okay, so here are the tools we're going to be using today. We got clippers. You want to get the kind that have the flat on the one side, angle on the others. X-Acto blade. Just a really simple emery board like you get for filing your nails. And then I like this kind of very thin kind of plastic cement with a brush on it. I find it works a lot better than the kind that you squeeze out of a tube. Less waste, less overage. What we're going to be assembling today is going to be some Orkboys. We're just going to do a couple of them, and this is just purely for demonstration purposes, and we'll do probably just 2, just to see how the process works, and I'll probably go from there. Just kind of take it step by step. First thing to note as a new hobbyist is the instructions are actually pretty decent on the newer kits especially. Some of the older kits aren't quite as good, but the new kits will tell you pretty much everything you need to know. So for example, if you look at the boss knob that they have here in this picture, they're going to tell you that this little symbol here tells you that it's got different alternate assembly types. So you can pick, which arm you want on the right, which arm you want on the left. Choices here, choices here. And then going down here, it'll tell you that you can have a choice of heads. The other thing that it'll do is, if you look at the sprue, it'll generally kind of group the numbers more or less together in the sprue. Not always, but generally speaking, it's kind of more or less together, which makes it easier to find. What I typically will try to do is I will look at kind of what I'm assembling, and I'll cut all the pieces out first for the thing that I'm assembling, put them in little piles, and then clean them up all together. If I'm doing like a whole squad, I might clip out everything for a squad and put the piles for each thing together, and then do them assembly line style. But for today, what I'll do is I'm going to clip out the boss knob here, and then I'll clip out the first boy over here, and then I'll go from there and just kind of clean those 2 up and take it from there. All right. Just kind of repeat the process for the whole thing. I'm going to just clip the rest of the thing out, and I'll come back to you when it's all done in the piles. Okay, so I got all the boss knob pieces up here, but one thing I didn't point out before that I realized I probably should. So, as a new hobbyist, one thing you want to be careful about as you're clipping, you want to take the flat side of the clippers and you want to get them just right in there as close as you can to the model side. That's going to make things easier later on. The other thing you want to watch is what things are actually sprue versus what things are model. It's hard to tell sometimes, so when in doubt, don't clip model stuff. Yeah, you just want to get in there as close as you can. It makes things easier for cleanup later. That's all I wanted to point out. Okay, so this is take 2 on the cleaning demonstration because I realized that a lot of my cleaning demonstration chunks were done off screen by accident. Apologies for that, but we live and we learn. So, as I was starting to say on the other piece that I noticed only during editing, when you're cleaning off, you'll have some big chunks and then you might have some smaller chunks to deal with. The bigger chunks, you'll deal with the actual sharp part of the blade, and you got to be very careful not to actually gouge the plastic itself. So you'll sort of take the flat of the blade along the seam of the piece and sort of work your way slowly along it to clean it off. That way, you're not actually like cutting divots into the plastic. For the things that are not so big, you'll work the back of the blade. Don't put your finger on top of the sharp part, but you'll work the back of the blade, hold it sideways, and just sort of scrape along the surface like so, very carefully and slowly to work your way around it. As you get more practice, obviously you can go faster and work your way around with a little bit more speed. But in both cases, you want to clean as much of the stuff as you can reach. Now, I also talked earlier about using the emery board. The emery board is essentially sandpaper. One side is rougher than the other. Usually the lighter colored side is smoother than the darker colored side. And so I usually use the lighter colored side for miniatures because plastic is super soft. Generally speaking, I find it most useful on places that are like bigger patches or flatter patches. So like these two spots here. This one here is a good spot that would work well for the softer side. So I just kind of would use it like sandpaper right there, like so. And it gets it fairly smooth fairly quickly. Notice I'm using less pressure. One way I use less pressure is by not putting my thumb or fingers right on top of the part I'm trying to sand. I put it out here that way because it's got a little give, right? And so I'm not able to like put my full pressure on it that way. And so it keeps it light and easy. And then over here, that's another flat spot. But that's a bigger chunk. And so on that side, on that one I might want to use the rougher side of the emery board. But I still don't want to use too much pressure. And so I still keep my thumb back away from the piece as I'm doing it. And work slowly and carefully to not over sand. And then if the piece is a little rough after doing that, I can still use the softer side, or the less gritty side to smooth that out a little bit. And if I really want to, I can still use the back of my knife to smooth it even farther and get it done that way. Okay, that's how you clean off the piece of miniature, and apologies for the sudden jump between different styles. Okay, so piles of clean parts are complete, and now I'm going to start gluing them together with my plastic cement here. Now, there's a few different ways you can do this. I think that the instructions will tell you that if you take this and you put some glue into the pieces and then you press them together. That's the best way to do it. But in my experience, what I find to be the easiest is actually to assemble the piece first. So you kind of dry fit it together. They got the little pegs in there, so you kind of squeeze them together. And then where you find the seams, you take the brush and you just kind of touch it to the seam there. And this cement is thin enough, it'll just flow right in between the parts, and it'll kind of fill up that seam and also just dry, and then it's done, you know. So I tend to like doing it that way personally, especially these particular models are push fit models because they came with one of the starter sets, which makes them easier to hold together without any glue at all. But in the case of models that are not push fit, the nice thing about doing it this way is that you can actually hold them with your fingers like this. Like if that one didn't have a pin, you can hold it together like that with your fingers away from the join point and just kind of touch it in there. And then you can even blow like that to make sure it goes all the way in and doesn't ruin any of the other detail on your finger like mine could have if I'd held on to it too long. And then you just kind of go around and do the same thing with all the other pieces, kind of one at a time. Just kind of push them together. A little bit of glue, not too much. If you get too much, it floods everywhere, and then it can ruin some of the detail. And then same thing on the bases. Now, if you look at other online tutorials, you might notice that some of those will have bases getting assembled later. And I would say that that's, you know, personal preference, but for me, especially as this is a beginner tutorial, I would say that it's better to go ahead and assemble them now for a couple of reasons. First of all, the look for me is frankly just better. I think it looks better when the models have their basing materials added after they're on them, after they're on their bases, because you know the feet just kind of look more lived in that way. You know, they look like they're part of the environment. They're dug into the mud and all that kind of stuff. So it looks more lived in. Second of all, as like I said, we're doing this as kind of a beginner tutorial, so that means as a beginner you're able to actually get them on the tabletop like right away and start playing with them if you want to. You don't have to wait until you're done painting everything in order to start playing with them if you don't want to. So that's kind of the two reasons why I'd recommend just go ahead and put the bases on now. And really, you know, the only time that you'd really want to do the basing ahead of time is if you have a really specific kind of basing plan in mind, you know. So once again, I'll go ahead and finish this guy up and then come back to you. Okay, so now we have our two guys assembled here. A couple of things. So first of all, one thing I forgot to do, I was going to do this before I assembled them, but I forgot, is that I didn't drill out the barrels. So you'll notice the end of the pistols that these guys have, both of them are a solid flat spot, and that doesn't look very good on the tabletop. There's a few different options for drilling them out. The best one, but it's not very beginner friendly, the best one in my opinion is a tool called a wow stick, which looks like a little pen. It's USB chargeable and it's got a little drill bit, and it's essentially just a little micro drill, right? But since this is a beginner friendly tutorial, we're not going to cheat and use the wow stick right now. Instead, we're just going to use our handy dandy X-Acto knife. And the way we do that is you just take the very tip of the X-Acto knife very carefully and just kind of push it into this very center here and kind of work it back and forth a little bit until you have a little starter hole. And then once you have a starter hole, you put the tip of your X-Acto knife in there and just kind of twist like so, very carefully and very slowly. Until you've hollowed out a little bit of a hole. And then you just kind of keep doing that until you have the hole the shape that you want it to be, to look like it's the barrel of a pistol, or a sligga as the orcs like to call it. Pretty simple technique, not too crazy, not too difficult. You know, and the thing that's nice about orcs in particular is that you know, they don't really take care of their weapons, so if it's not quite perfect, that's okay, because they like their stuff kind of rough and misshapen, and it all just kind of works anyway because they believe it does. And if you're an orc, the power of belief is a real thing. So that's that. That's the assembly piece. We'll get on to priming next. Okay, for priming, I'm going to cheat a little bit in that I'm going to use my airbrush, but this is exactly the same technique if you use an airbrush or rattle can. The only reason I'm using my airbrush in this case is because that way I can do it indoors and video it more easily than if I had to go outdoors to do it. And also, it's pretty cold and rainy outside right now, so I don't want to do it outside. But it's literally the exact same technique. The only difference is if you're using a rattle can, obviously you want to do it outdoors, and you want the the weather to not be rainy and cold. And otherwise, literally the exact same technique. For beginners especially, I'd recommend using black as your primer because it hides mistakes a lot more easily. For more advanced techniques, there are going to be a few other options that you can choose to use. But starting off with black is just a really good baseline technique. And so that's what we're going to start with here today. If you're going to use an airbrush like me, I would obviously recommend making sure you use a glove and masking and all that kind of stuff for your own health. So I'll be doing that myself in a second. Okay, all done with that. I will come back a little bit later to show you a neat technique for getting some highlights. There are a couple neat techniques. We want to let these dry real well first. But real quick on the technique, just to cover it real quick. One of the things to make sure, regardless whether you're using an airbrush or rattle can, what you're going for is light, thin coats. You don't want to, even with a primer, you don't want to go too heavy, because if you go too heavy, you're going to obscure the details. So you're going for light passes, thin coats, and you want to make sure you have kind of a light coverage everywhere. The primer is not really there to saturate the model with black completely. I mean, in my case, it did a pretty good job of doing that. But what you're really aiming for is just giving the subsequent layers of paint something to hang on to. The only place that I really like to make sure I get, really, really black is the underside and the parts that are going to be the hardest to reach with my paintbrush. So like all the underneath parts under there. So, and again, that's just because if I'm messing with my paintbrush, I'm sure that they still look like they're in the shadow at the end of the day. All right. Okay. Like I said, come back when these are dry. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about paints. As I've said before, what our goal is for this project is really to look at an early, kind of entry-level beginner painter. And so we don't want to really go with the super expensive stuff. Obviously, there's all kinds of miniature painting paints available, specific brands. You know, Army Painter is super popular. I like them. There's also plenty of offerings by Games Workshop themselves. You know, we've got this Ogre and Camo here that I've got from them. There's also the thing I would recommend actually for a beginner painter is to not go out and get like a whole bunch of paints. The box art on the back of most boxes of, like, you know, Warhammer figures or whatever are going to give you a painting guide, and it's going to tell you a whole bunch of paints to get. And what they're really trying to do is they're trying to sell you on their painting system that says, you know, get this kind of blue for your base coat, and then this kind of blue for your highlight, and this kind of blue for your shadows, and all that kind of stuff. I recommend if you're just starting out, especially if you just got like one model and you're just trying to get into the hobby, you're just trying to figure out if you like it or not, definitely don't go that route. It gets really expensive really quickly. And frankly, artist paints that you can get from like Michael's or Blick or any of the hobby stores are often a little cheaper. You know, they're not quite as performant in some applications as the ones that are purpose-built for miniatures, but I found for most applications, they're kind of my go-to. They're less expensive because you buy them usually in bigger containers, and you can also get starter kits of, like, you know, 6 basic colors. Like this is a Liquitex one that came, I think it was like 6 or 8 colors in it, and they're all separated now. So I don't remember exactly what came in the box, but there was, like I said, 6 or 8 colors came in it, and it had all the basics, right? And so you can, you know, kind of mix and match colors. You got some whites, you got some browns, you got some reds, you got some blues, and you know, if you remember anything from kindergarten, you know, you can mix your blue and yellow and get a green. You know, you can mix your blue and red, get a purple, all that kind of stuff. And you know, I encourage you, as I said, especially as a beginning painter, to kind of start off with that. You know, play around with it, figure out what works together, what doesn't work together, and just sort of get the hang of it. And that way you're not spending a whole lot getting started on the hobby. And as you start a new project, maybe you add a paint or two to your collection that is, you know, useful for that particular project. But you don't go whole hog and, like I said, try to buy, you know, 20 paints to match what's on the box art. Because frankly, I mean, who wants to match the box art anyway? You know, this is your project, this is your art. You want it to be unique, right? So on that note, I'm going to start off with a really, really simple technique for beginner painters that I like to use. And we'll get started on this guy here. What we're going to do, here's another little trick. I've got a Lego, you know, just board, right? It's a regular Lego board, usually they're green like this. I went ahead and spray painted it with a black primer, and I use this as a dry palette. And what that is it's a place I can put paint on, and it's not absorbent. I can use it to kind of prep my brushes, prep my mixes, things like that. And it gives me a little bit of texture, so I can kind of test what the consistency of the paint is before I apply it to the model. And so especially for a technique called dry brushing, which I'll show you in a second, it's super helpful to go. Now there's, again, dry texture palettes that you can buy online, and you can, you know, spend all kinds of money on them, and most of them perform better than this does in various ways. But again, if you're getting started, this is a go-to way to go. And when you're done with it, if you're, you know, want to use this for Lego again, you can also always hit it with some isopropyl alcohol. It'll clean all the paint right off, and you can use it for your Legos. No harm, no foul. So let's get started. Okay, so to get started painting this guy here, what we're going to do to begin with is we're going to do a technique called dry brushing. And what that's going to do is it's going to give us a really good and very simple and fast way of sort of seeing where all the detail sits on this guy. Now there's a few different ways to do that, to accomplish that same task. But again, we're going for a very simple approach for beginners. And then, you know, as this series continues, as this channel continues, we'll explore other techniques to do it that are a little bit more advanced or produce better results. But like I said, we're starting off bare minimum, super easy, going for starters for beginners. So got my miniature here. He's had a chance to completely dry after doing the priming the other day. I've got my texture palette here. It's been primed. Primer's had a chance to dry as well. I've got some white paint. Right now I've got titanium white from Liquitex. It doesn't matter, any white paint will do. You could also use a gray paint if you wanted to. You could mix a black and a white to make a gray. Again, doesn't really matter. I'm going for white here just to get maximum, what am I trying to say? Maximum contrast for the camera, just so you can really see what's going on here. But you can make it more subtle by going with gray if you want to. You can make it more interesting by doing other colors as a kind of a pre-highlight. And we call this a pre-highlight because what it does is it gives you a little bit of brightness to the model before you start applying other colors to it. And when we apply the other colors, we're going to start off fairly thin on those other coats, which allows that that brightness to kind of shine through through the thin layers. We didn't cover brushes yet, but what I like to start with, especially when I'm doing dry brushing, is makeup brushes. Makeup brushes are fairly inexpensive, and you know, you can kind of replace them whenever you want to. They're very common, easy to find. There are, again, artist quality brushes that do similar jobs, but again, more expensive, and while they're better for certain applications, these will do the job most of the time for you. I've got a really big one here. I've got a smaller one here. The smaller one is better if you want to be a little more precise, obviously. The bigger one I find is very soft, and so when I'm doing something really large, or if I'm trying to be really smooth on something smaller like this, and I don't really care too much what it looks like in the end because I'm going to cover stuff up with it, I'll go with the bigger brush just to get it done quickly. So I'm going to start off by kind of tapping into my pile of paint there. I don't want to get a whole lot on there. I'm getting just a little bit. And then I go on over here and I just make little circles to cover the whole head of the thing. Again, not getting a lot on there. And then what I want to do is start kind of dragging it across here until I can see that I'm just sort of leaving a little bit on the highlight of the nubs. You can see that? It's not coating them. It's just leaving a little bit on the highlights, right? On the top and the edges. So you can see where you can make out like where it's saying the words Lego. Here, let me do it over here on this corner. It's purely back. You can kind of go across like that, and you can sort of see where it's catching the edge of the circle, and you can see where the words Lego are coming out. All right, so that's how I know I've got enough on here without being too much. And I'm gonna do it gently. I don't want to like jam it in there, get really hard. I'm just gonna kind of go like this, and I'm going from the top down. And you can see very quickly it picks up the edges of the model and highlights them with the white so that I know exactly where those edges are. It's a lot easier to see on the camera. It's a lot easier to see in person also. And as a new painter, it kind of gives me an idea, some sense of where the light is hitting if the sun is right above this model, right? If the sun's shining down right on top, this light is going to hit just like that, right? It's going to kind of fall down the sides. It's going to hit all these spots here that I can get with the brush coming down the sides, coming down the front a little bit. If I can't reach underneath there with this big brush, odds are good that the sunlight's not hitting it directly. It's getting some bounce light in there, right? So, and then those areas I'll still get, but I'm going to get after the brush has been depleted of some of that paint, and so it's not going to be as heavy of a paint or heavy a pigment going in there. All right, so I'm just kind of getting it in there after the paint's kind of gone off it a little bit already. See, just a very, very quick kind of coating, right? Again, the point here is not to make it look good, it's just to get a really, really rough sketch of where light's hitting it. And this is mostly for you as a new painter to sort of get an idea of where you might want to highlight your model based on the light. Now, that's not going to be the only place you highlight it, because there's more to it than just where the light's hitting. For example, if you're trying to draw attention to something on your model, you might want to put a little more highlight there too. For example, the face. Almost always you want to draw attention to the face, so you're going to add a little bit of extra highlighting into the face of this model to make it really stand out. Similarly, if it's you know, you got a metal helmet, you might have a little bit more reflection on the metal helmet. You're going to probably put a little extra highlighting up there. that sort of thing. But at the very least, it draws out a little bit of the detail for you and gives you a little bit of sense of where you might want to be applying a little bit of extra time, a little extra highlighting, and that sort of thing. It also, like I said, helps it shine through a little bit on the initial coats of the other paint that we're going to apply to it.
Thanks everybody for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed the video on getting started assembling and priming a plastic miniature. Please don't judge me on the dry brushing you saw today. It was intentionally quick and dirty just to get the starkest of contrast going in order to help new painters sketch the surface of the model. In future content, I'm looking forward to exploring more nuanced uses of that technique as well as others along the way. Be sure to leave comments and let me know what you liked and didn't like about the video, as well as any content you'd like me to cover in the future. As I said in the intro, part 2 of this series is coming soon, and it will cover getting your model painted using basic techniques and a limited palette of colors. See you next time.